So now we'll be adding the functionality to accept a request. And this step is important because based on this, we'll be creating a bunch of different entities inside our backend, such as a friendship, a conversation, conversation members, and the messages list. So to define those, let's just go inside our convex folder and into schema.ts. And let's just define all the other tables which we'll have in our backend. So we'll have another friends table in our backend, and we'll use define table. And what this will do is contain user1, which will be v.id of users, and user2, which will be v.id of users again. And what this will do is basically contain a list of active friendships between different users once they've accepted a friend request. And for each friendship, we will also be having an active conversation. So we'll say conversation ID, and that will be equal to v.id of conversations. Now we don't have this table defined yet, but we will soon. And then let's add the indexes. So dot index by underscore user one, and then we pass in user one. Just copy this and by underscore user two, and then again by underscore conversation ID, and then use the conversation ID, and this should be user two. So that's our friends table. Next, we have our conversations table. So define table. This will have a field of name. It'll be an optional field. So we'll say v.optional and v.string. We'll say is group. So this will decide whether it's a group conversation or not. And then last message ID, which is v.optional and v.id of messages. So since a conversation could have no messages, it's optional. But in case it does, this will keep track of the last message that was sent. We don't have any indexes for this. So next we'll have conversation members and define table. And what this table will do is basically keep a track of a mapping between users and the conversations that they're a part of. So the first field will be the member ID. So for each, so it's a many-to-many mapping between conversations and users. So for each mapping, we'll have a member ID. So that's the v.id of users. We'll have the conversation ID that this member is a part of. So that'll be v.id and conversations. And then we will have last seen message, because each user for each conversation, they will have the message that they've seen last. So that'll be v.optional and again v.id of messages. And then we will say dot index by underscore member ID, and we pass in member ID. Copy this and paste it again, and we will say by underscore conversation ID, and we will use conversation ID over here. And then lastly, we want to do a combination of by underscore member ID underscore conversation ID. And since it's multiple, we will add a comma here, and we will say conversation ID as well. So we have 3 indexes for this table. And the last table for now is messages. So we'll say define table, sender ID. So that's the person who sent this message, v.id users. We have the conversation ID. So the conversation to which this message was sent, v.id conversations. We have type, which is v.string. So this could be a message of type text, or it could be an image or a file. So we just keep track of that using the type variable over here. And then the content, which will be the content that's sent inside. So instead of being a string, this will be v.array of v.string. And this is basically because the user could send multiple files or multiple images as a part of their message, and we'll keep a track of that as an array of strings. So even if they send a normal message, that'll be an array of one string. And then lastly, we add dot index by underscore conversation ID, and we pass in the conversation ID and save that. So that's it for our database schemas for now. So now that the schema is made for now, we will create the mutation for accepting a request. So we'll go into request.ts. Before we create the request, we want to add another check where we want to say const friends1 is equal to await ctx.db.query the friends table, and say dot with index by underscore user1 q dot equal user1 and current user dot id dot collect. So we're getting all of the friends of the current user who is creating this request, and friends2 by underscore user2 and user2. So what we're doing is we're getting all of the friendships where the current user is the first friend, and all of the friendships where the current user is the second friend. And we'll just check in either of those cases if the other friend is the user that is getting this request. So friends1 dot sum friend dot user2 is equal to receiver dot id. or friends2.sum friend.user1 is equal to receiver.id. And then inside here, if the friendship already exists, which is basically what this is checking, we'll say throw new convex error. You are already friends with this user. So as a recap, what we're doing is we're getting all of the friendships in which the current user is the first friend, and we're checking if the second user in these friendships is equal to the receiver. And we're also doing the opposite, where the current user is the second friend and the receiver is the first friend. And what this if case basically checks is that if there is already a friendship between the two users, and if there is, we don't want to send another request, so we add this check. So now that that's out of the way, we can create another mutation for creating a new friendship and accepting a request. So we say const, so we say export const accept is equal to mutation, args is equal to id v.id of requests, and then the handler is of type async. We take in the ctx and args, and then we do what we did before where we check the identity and the current user. So let's just copy that. And then we say const request is equal to await ctx.db.get args.id. And then we check if no request or request dot receiver not equal to current user.id, then throw new convex error that says there was an error accepting this request. Otherwise, we create a new conversation. So we say const conversation ID is equal to await ctx.db.insert. And over here, we've begun creating a new friendship and the conversations related to it. So we insert into the conversations table, and we say that the is group should be false because this is a private conversation between two users. So we made the conversation. Now await ctx.db.insert friends user1 current user.id user2 request.sender, and then the conversation ID which we just made. And you begin to see here that even though a friendship is two-way, the current user can only be in either one of the two fields. And that's why we had to do that double check when creating a new request. So we made the friendship. Now let's create the conversation member. So await ctx.db.insert. And what we're doing here is basically linking the users with this conversation which we just made. So inside conversations member, let's add member ID, current user.id, and then conversation ID. We'll just pass that in. And a small mistake over here. This should not be this should be just users. And now that error is gone. And we do the same thing because we have two members in this conversation. We do that for request.sender as well. So now both of these users are a part of this conversation. And then the last thing we do is await ctx.db.delete request.id. Save that. And now let's add this to the front end. So we will open up request.tsx. And the same way we did the deny request, we will do the accept one. So accept request and accept pending. And this will be the accept function. For the buttons, we will say that disable should either be deny pending or accept pending for both. And we'll just copy the on request content over here into the accept one. And this will be accept request. We'll pass in the ID. The message for success should say accepted, and the rest should remain the same. So let's save that and just refresh. Again, the request is being rendered out over here, and let's click on the accept button. We see friend request accepted, and now let's check our database for the tables and the new data. So now the requests table is empty, but we see we have a bunch of other tables. So messages will of course be empty since we haven't made any. Friends, so it has one object inside it which maps the friendship of the two users which we just accepted. A conversations one where we have a single conversation which is non-group, and then we have conversation members where the conversation ID is the same, but it's the two members that have just become friends. So that's it for friend requests and how to create them, list them, accept and deny them. Next up, we'll be getting started with the conversations and how to send messages and to view the messages.